Porsche lost 99% of its profit, cut 1,900 jobs, and got thrown out of Germany's biggest stock index. It did all of this in a single year, 2025. And to feel how violent that fall really is, you first have to see how high it was standing the moment before. Only 3 years earlier, in 2022, Porsche had been crowned at 75 billion in one of the grandest market debuts Europe had ever staged, one of the most profitable car makers alive, rich enough to carry an entire family of brands upon its shoulders. Empires built that high do not fall in 12 months, and somewhere beneath the headlines, you already sense why. A fortune on this scale is never simply lost to bad luck. The world did endure a brutal year, and every rival bled alongside it, yet only one of them bled like this. So if it was not the market that brought Porsche down, then something else did. Something quieter, closer to home, and far harder to forgive. Strip the misfortune away, and what remains no longer looks like an accident. It looks like a removal, patient and methodical, of the single most valuable thing this company owned. That thing was carried straight out the front door while the entire world leaned in and applauded. What it was, and how it was done, is the story you never thought to put together. To understand what was taken, you first have to understand what Porsche was. Not the company, the thing people felt about it. Porsche was not loved the way people love a car. It was loved the way you love only once, completely, unreasonably, for life. To the faithful, there was no second choice and never had been. You would wait years for one and count the waiting a privilege, because every other car on earth had quietly ceased to exist the moment you fell. Fathers passed the keys to their children, who passed them down again. Devotion handed across generations like a name, like a faith, like a vow. And at the heart of it lived the 911, a shape so sure of itself it scarcely changed in half a century. Because when you have found the thing you love, you do not redesign it, you protect it. You never wanted it for the badge, you wanted the way it answered you. The steering that spoke back through your fingertips, the engine breathing close behind you, the sound no imitation ever caught. This was not admiration, it was ardor, and ardor does not shop around. Yet what the world forgot to count was this, that love was the reason for the wealth. Porsche grew rich because it was wanted this completely. The devotion came first, and the fortune was only ever what that love had earned. But love is not something you own. It is something you are handed to protect. That was the one duty those who ran Porsche were given, and they chose, instead, to milk it. They looked at the people who loved this company past all reason and saw not devotion, but a weakness they had yet to press. So they pressed it, through those boom years, lifting the price of the cars you wanted most by half, and billing you not for the car, but for how much you loved it. They had measured exactly what a devoted heart could bear, and charged to its very edge. To you it was faith. To them, you were prey too loyal to run. And the cruelest part, you understand too late. The thing you loved like family had only been counting your money while you served it. That is when the faithful began to feel used, and to wonder whether the love had ever run both ways. Every markup exploited that love, and they knew it, selling the very thing that made them rich, certain it would never run dry. But overcharging the faithful, in the end, was the smaller sin. You can forgive a price. What you cannot forgive is being left. Because the people running Porsche were about to do something no markup could ever undo. It began as ambition dressed as vision. Back in 2022, they declared that by 2030, 80% of every Porsche sold would be electric, silent where it had always sung, parted from the engine that was half the reason you loved it. The press called it bold. They called it the future. It was neither. It was a wager. The entire identity of the company staked on one technology and one deadline, with no hedge, no fallback, no road back if the world declined to agree. And here is the part that should make any strategist wince. The one thing no rival could ever copy was the irrational love you felt, a moat no amount of money could build. They abandoned that moat to go and compete in the single arena where everyone competes. They poured the lineup into it, the Taycan, the electric Macan, brilliant machines perhaps, but machines any company with deep enough pockets could now build. They had traded a monopoly on desire for a place in a commodity knife fight. Still they pressed further. Billions flowed into batteries they would build themselves. An entire industrial bet wagered on demand that arrived far slower and far smaller than the bet required. And when cars alone no longer proved how modern they had become, they wandered past cars, into e-bikes, into software, into hypercars wearing other names. Each venture one more step from the only thing they had ever been truly great at. And with every step, something went quiet. The engine that once breathed behind you. The sound no imitation ever caught. The car that answered your hands before you finished asking. One by one, the things you loved were shown the door. Not stolen this time, but abandoned, by the very people sworn to keep them, while the world applauded the courage of it. They thought they were building the future. They were walking out on the past that adored them, certain, the way the arrogant always are, that you would still be waiting when they turned around. None of this, not the gouging, not the gamble, was an accident. It was the same flaw, wearing two faces. Somewhere along the way, the people running Porsche had stopped believing they could be wrong. And why would they? The market had just crowned them at $75 billion. They had posted the richest year in the company's history. When the whole world tells you you're a genius, every warning begins to sound like noise. And loyalty that never breaks begins to look like loyalty that cannot. So they stopped earning it. And the warnings were everywhere. The faithful were turning, and they raised prices anyway. By 2024, electric demand across the industry was visibly cooling, and they held the line on 80%. China, their single largest market, was slipping to homegrown rivals, and they trusted the loyalty to hold, the way it always had. That is the anatomy of arrogance. Not the confidence to lead, but the certainty that the rules bend for you. They had spent the love and bet the soul, and still believed the faithful would wait, the market would turn, and the badge would save them. It would not. And the world did not come back around. The faithful did not wait. The market did not turn. The badge saved no one. Instead, every bet came due at once. The electric demand they had wagered everything on never arrived at the scale they needed, and the cars sat, brilliant and unwanted. China, the market that had made them, turned away, as homegrown rivals built electric cars that were cheaper, faster, and frankly better. Tariffs in America carved $700 million off the bottom line in a single stroke, and the battery future they had poured billions into began to crumble. Northvolt, the supplier they had backed, collapsing into bankruptcy. Now, here is what honesty demands. None of these storms belonged to Porsche alone. The whole industry stood in the same weather. Mercedes stumbled. BMW slowed. Even Tesla bled. Hardship like this falls on everyone. But Porsche had walked into that storm with less protection than anyone. The trust it had drawn down. The focus it had scattered across ventures that were never its own. The room to be wrong, traded away in the years it believed it could not lose. None of it left Porsche defenseless, but all of it left the company far more exposed than it ever had to be. And so the same weather that merely bruised the others tore into this one. That is why only one of them bled like this. There comes a moment when even the proud must confess. And for Porsche, it arrived in the autumn of 2025. The grand vision was reversed. Combustion engines hurried back into the lineup, and the promise of 80% electric by 2030 quietly dropped. A target its own CEO now admitted was no longer realistic. But listen to what he blamed. Months earlier, in a memo to his own staff, Oliver Bloom had already named the culprit. And it was not the bet. It was the business model itself. The one that, in his words, had served us well for many decades, but supposedly no longer worked. Read that again. The model that built Porsche, that made it one of the most profitable car makers alive, was now cast as the thing that had failed. But a model that works for decades does not collapse in a single year. What collapsed was the bet laid on top of it. And the proof sits inside the receipt. Porsche wrote down roughly 4 billion euros against the year, and the overwhelming share of it was the abandoned electric platform and the batteries. The tariffs only a fraction. The business model he blamed barely figuring at all. The numbers accuse the gamble. The confession accuses everything but. And the bill was merciless. For the first time in its history, Porsche posted a quarterly operating loss, 966 million euros. By year's end, that write-down had very nearly erased the company's entire annual profit. That is the number the whole world woke up to. Reduce it to something you can hold. In 2024, for every car Porsche handed to a customer, the company kept roughly 18,000 euros in profit. 1 year later, that figure had collapsed to around 1,500. 1,500 euros. On a machine that can sell for the price of a house. The profit buried in every Porsche had shrunk from a small fortune to little more than the price of a single option ticked on the order sheet. And still, Porsche did not fall. The cars kept selling. Most of that vanished profit was an accounting charge, ink on a page, not cash hauled out the door. But do not let the survival fool you. A company this strong does not surrender 99% of its profit to an accident, to bad luck, or to a market that merely turned. A wound that deep is never a cause. It is evidence. Evidence that the damage had reached past the balance sheet, past the factory floor, down into the one thing no rival could ever build or buy. The brand, the desire, the irrational love that had made Porsche both adored and rich. That, not the profit, is what was stolen. The 99% was only the moment the theft grew too large to hide. So call it what it is. A robbery is not only a stranger and a crowbar, it is anything of value taken from the people it belongs to, by the very hands trusted to keep it safe. And the most valuable thing Porsche ever owned was never on its balance sheet: the trust of the people who loved it. That trust was not lost to the storm. The storm took the profit. Markets do that to everyone. But only the people you trust can take your faith and spend it as if it were their own. Mined for every price hike the loyal could bear, then gambled on a future those same loyalists never asked for. The faithful handed over their devotion to be guarded. It was emptied instead. Which leaves the one question no earnings report will ever answer: whether what was taken, the trust, the devotion, the soul, ever finds its way home. That question, whether it ever comes home, has no answer yet. But the collapse left a second question behind it, and this one answers itself with merciless clarity. When something this precious is stolen, who is left to pay for the theft? Follow the answer all the way down and you reach the cruelest truth in the whole story. The bill landed, almost to the last cent, on the people who never had a hand in running it up. It came first for the workers. Roughly 1,900 of them lost their jobs. The people who tightened the bolts and gave the engines their voice, who were never once in the room where the bets were placed, who never set a price or staked a single euro on electric. They had made none of the decisions that broke the company. They were only the first to be handed its ruin. Then it came for the believers, the ordinary people who had bought the stock. The shares opened at 82 euros and surged toward 120, so they bought the way people always buy the things they love. Near the top, certain it would only ever climb. By the autumn of 2025, that certainty was trading below 45. And then came the final humiliation. Less than 3 years after the proudest market debut in modern German history, Porsche was expelled from the DAX, struck from the index of the nation's greatest companies, removed from the table of giants it had joined to such applause. The dream had been sold to them at its most expensive. The wreckage was handed back at a discount. And then, once more, it came for the faithful. They had already paid. The premium that loyalty is always quietly charged, paid gladly, year upon year. Now they paid a second time, in a currency no refund can ever return. They watched the thing they loved be slowly emptied of the very soul that had made them love it. So follow the bill all the way to its end and watch the one set of hands it never reaches. It never reaches the architects. The executives who staged the listing at its peak were paid handsomely for the staging. A special bonus worth millions, released in slices across the years. The final slice collected in 2025 itself. The year of the 99%, the 1,900 lost jobs, the exile from the DAX. And even as the profits bled away, the executives at the very top remained among the highest paid in all of Germany. When the bill finally came due, they did not fall with the company they had brought to its knees. Those at the top stepped back from Porsche and kept their seats at the head of Volkswagen, the empire that owns it. So tally it. The ones who never made the bet paid with their jobs, their savings, and their faith. The ones who made it kept their salaries, their bonuses, and their seats. And here is where someone will object. A robbery needs a robber, someone who set out to take. No one ever meant to steal the soul of Porsche. That much is true. But a robbery has never required intent. It requires only this, that something precious, placed in your hands to guard, be treated as though it were yours to spend, and then spent. They did not hate the brand. They did something quieter and worse. They stopped listening to it. They raised the prices and assumed the faithful would always pay. They walked away from the engine and assumed the faithful would always wait. They were warned again and again and waved every warning away. Volkswagen was built to put a car in every driveway. Porsche was built to be the one car not everyone could have. And they ran the rare thing by the logic of the common one. That is not innocence. Carelessness with something sacred is its own kind of theft, and those robbed by it pay just as dearly as if the hands had meant it. A misfortune would have fallen on everyone alike. This fell on everyone but the few who caused it. That is the fingerprint a robbery leaves behind, even one no one ever meant to commit. This is how the great ones fall. Not to a stronger rival, not to some catastrophe out of a clear sky. They fall from within, undone by the very hands entrusted to hold them aloft. Porsche was not slain. Porsche was squandered. For there is a law older than any market, and Porsche's masters forgot it. A fortune is never the source of anything. It is a shadow, cast by something living that stands behind it. Behind Porsche's billions stood a thing that could not be built or bought or borrowed. The devotion of millions. An irrational, inherited love that turned a machine into a faith. The love came first. The wealth was only its shadow on the wall. And the tragedy, the whole of it, began the instant its keepers turned toward the shadow and let the fire that cast it burn down to embers. They mined that love for every coin it would surrender. They wagered the identity it was built upon on a future that had not yet come. And through all of it, they remained certain, serenely, fatally certain, that the faithful would forgive, that devotion was a law of nature and not a gift that could be withdrawn. They were warned. They did not listen. The arrogant never do, until the day the world stops bending to them. For Porsche, that day was 2025. Let us be fair, for fairness is the only thing that lends a judgment weight. The storm was real. The tariffs, the vanishing of China, an electric age that came late and small, these were no phantoms, and they did not haunt Porsche alone. They fell upon Mercedes, upon BMW, upon mighty Tesla itself. They fell upon the whole of the industry like a single hard winter. No honest voice can lay the entire ruin at the feet of a few executives. That would be a lie, and this story has no need of lies. And yet, when that winter came, every rival still had a roof above its head, and Porsche's stewards had spent the good years tearing theirs down, beam by beam, deaf to every voice that warned them the sky would not stay clear forever. They had inherited a shelter of trust vast enough to outlast any storm. They dismantled it for warmth. The same wind that merely chilled the others cut this one to the bone, and the difference was never the wind. It was the house they chose not to keep. They did not summon the storm, but they emptied the one defense that might have survived it. That is their share of the blame, and it is the largest one. And what then of Porsche herself? There at the bottom of the long fall. She did not die. The great names do not always die. Sometimes they are only humbled. The cars are still magnificent. The engineering is still among the noblest the human hand has ever shaped. And somewhere tonight, a child hears a flat six climb toward its limit and feels the very thing his grandfather felt. The wounded thing still stands, diminished, quieter, stripped of a little of the glory that once seemed eternal, but standing. So the burden passes now to new hands, to answer for all that the old ones spent. They have promised a leaner company, a swifter one, a more desirable one. They have called the engine home from exile and quietly buried the electric vow that began the ruin. Perhaps they will succeed. Perhaps the machine still to come will be the finest this storied name has ever made. But the cars were never what was lost. What was taken cannot be re-engineered or refinanced or unveiled beneath stage lights, because what was taken was trust. And whether trust, once broken, is ever made whole again, is the one question this story refuses to answer.